No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube at Hacking Your Leadership and leave us a review on iTunes. On this Thoughtful Thursday, we're going to be going over some listener feedback from our Monday episode. We're in the process of going over a 4-episode series over 4 Mondays on the different reasons why a team might not be high performing, the kind of the dysfunctions that exist that may prevent that. And if we define high performing as just kind of this sustained ability to deliver results over a long period of time with approximately the same team, with mostly the same people, that would what we consider a high performing team. On Monday's episode, we talked about how one of the reasons that a team might not be high performing is that there is a fear or avoidance of conflict amongst the team members, and that could be stemming from people who they're afraid of challenging a peer in the room for their own lack of political standing in the room, or they don't want to be seen as the one who's always being the naysayer or playing devil's advocate. It's kind of this lack of psychological safety that says I'm just going to keep my mouth shut, and oftentimes that doesn't mean that those people keep their mouths shut all the time. It means they keep their mouths shut when it's appropriate, and they open their mouths when they feel like they're in safe company, right? When you want one-on-one with another person, not the person who needs to hear it, of course, but one-on-one with another person, and that kind of sows the seeds of distrust and discontent within the team. On Monday's episode, one of the really cool things we talked about was that an example or an exercise that we can do in order to kind of help our teams get through this. And this was the bad ideas example. So if you haven't heard this, go back and listen to Monday's episode. But our listeners reached out to us after the fact and said, "Hey, that was a good example, but we want more. We want to know more about what we can do to kind of lower the fear of conflict or the avoidance of conflict on our teams." Because we think this does happen sometimes, that we're in a room full of people and everybody says, "Yay, let's go do this." And then it's clear that they didn't really mean the yay that they said. And I'm curious what you think about this, Lorenzo.
Yeah, I think it's good dialogue to have. And I think in full transparency, I don't know that you ever get to a place where there's no conflict. And I think that's the point of why we're talking about it, is like you actually need conflict, but there is a way to do it that allows you to be productive. There's a way to do it that allows you to challenge one another, to discuss ideas, to push back, and to walk out of the room sometimes saying, you know what, like I don't 100% agree, but this is where we've landed, and this is the decision that we're making. So like I'm going to support the vision or the strategy of what we're talking about. So I think that, again, sometimes the idea of conflict gets caught up in the, conflict is bad, no conflict is good. And I don't necessarily see it that way. So I'm glad that we're talking about it. I think conflict can be very good and should be a part of what you do. And maybe you call it a different word. Maybe it's healthy debate, right? Maybe it's feedback. I don't like whatever you want to put on top of that word. I see some of that, not all of it, but some of that as conflict, and healthy conflict where you have an observation of a behavior that you want to correct or a differencing of opinions. But I definitely think it's something that's needed. And when, like I said, when done really well, people feel good about like they had a chance to express their thoughts or their ideas, and that they were heard, and that it was valued. And then that whatever the outcome is going to include that part of the dialogue or the conversation, and then they're okay with it because they know sometimes what they're maybe sharing is going to be the thing that turns out to be, and then maybe sometimes it's going to be halfway there, and then sometimes it's going to be the opposite. But like we know this is a part of how we want to be able to make decisions, and if we walk out of a room feeling like maybe we still have more questions, that we actually ask those questions. And we, to your point earlier, we do it in a way that is positive and that is productive.
Right. I would say that if you're on a team and you aren't seeing any conflict, that's usually a bad thing. because it doesn't mean there's nothing to have conflict over. It means there's a fear or an avoidance of conflict to begin with, and that isn't a healthy thing. I'm sure there are some exceptions out there, but very few, especially on a larger team or on a team where you have people who they don't have a relationship outside of work. If it's not like a family or a group of best friends that got together to start a business, that kind of thing. If it's just a team that you put together and the only time they see each other is at work, if there is zero conflict at all, it'd be hard for me to come up with a scenario where that was always a good thing. I'd be very, very scared of a situation like that, of why that was lacking. But when we talk about, how to work through conflict, the biggest kind of, I think, roadblock or hurdle to doing this is this either one person's inability to detach their ideas or their suggestions from their own identity, or another person's belief that they can't shoot holes in an idea because it will be interpreted as shooting holes in that person as opposed to the person's idea. And that is what leads to a lot of people kind of avoiding that conflict. But when they're talking about it, one-on-one with other people later on, or they're kind of, when you can tell there's discontent, it doesn't mean that they didn't want to. It means that they felt like they couldn't. And so what I want to ask you, Lorenzo, is when have you encountered this on a team that you have had where it got to the point, or it rose to the point where you actually had to sit people down and talk to them about, okay, this has to change because this is going nowhere fast and it's going to get worse unless we kind of just really hash it out. I want to ask you that, but first I want to give it a word from one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo, when has it risen to the occasion where you have to actually sit down with some people and kind of pull rank a little bit and say we have to talk about this out in the open because this is not going anywhere positive?
It's happened, and I anticipate that it will continue to happen, because I think when you are working with leaders and when you have kind of, again, this delta amongst leaders that are maybe new to role, new to position, new to an element of authority, those that are not, those that have different perspectives and opinions, like, you're going to have those moments where sometimes two leaders maybe just cannot figure that out. And I can think of a very specific example where I had two leaders that were very passionate about the work that they do. They were very passionate about the team that they led. They were passionate about the outcomes and the results that they wanted. And because they were both very passionate, very opinionated, it was just continuing to be one of these things that would bubble up. Like they would bump heads, and then it was starting to kind of feel outside of just their inability to kind of get aligned. It was starting to feel through the other leaders, because each of them would kind of go back and be like, I can't believe they said this, or they want to do it this way. And so I pulled the two of them together and I sat down and I said, like, let's work through this, but I need you to understand that there are things here that I think that maybe neither one of you can see, and that you're actually both more alike than you are different. And so here's actually what I want us to do right now. I'd like each of you to just write down, not what maybe is the thing that's annoying you, or maybe that is the thing that is causing you to, maybe have some conflict with this person. But I want you to write down what you see in them that you think that you really appreciate. Not maybe it's not the ideas or whatever, but like what you see in them as a leader that you really appreciate. I want you to write that down. Right now we're gonna start there, and they both did. And then I said, cool. Now I want you to read it out loud, and they did. And the funniest part of the whole situation was that you would have thought that they had cheated with like wrote each other's like words down, like that they saw the other person was writing down, because they were so similar in exactly what they saw in each other, about they would defend the team, that they really, really cared about people's development, that they would stand up for ideas, like these things. And what was happening is that they were doing it to each other, not realizing that they both had the same intent and the same reason as to why they were doing it. And at that point, they kind of looked at each other and I said, yeah, exactly. Like, the reason you two are having conflict is because you're actually on exactly the same page. You see the work very similarly. Your approach is a little bit different, but you're both passionately fighting, for the same things that you want to see within our team. So I'm going to give you 30 minutes to talk through this, and I need you both on the same page. And I need you to both understand, like, I want that level of passion. I want that level of commitment from both of you towards making this team better. And then I walked out of the room. and they had their time. And it wasn't 30 minutes. I think they were there for like another hour and a half. But coming out of that, I think that's what they needed to hear, was that they each needed to hear from each other that the other person actually respected them. They saw who they were. They saw the work that they were doing, and they validated that for one another. And they realized, again, that they were more alike than they were different. And the cool part of that is that they are very close now, and they defend each other when it comes to certain things that are going on, which I think is the right thing to do. But those are those moments sometimes that you definitely have to step in.
I've always heard that when you are arguing with somebody about something, it's important to look at them as a teammate, and that both of you are on the same team, and the opponent is whatever the wrong idea is, not your opponent is the person that you're talking with. And if you can do that, if you can take two people who are already on the same team, and instead of getting them to look at each other like they're on opposing teams, each of whom is, pushing forward their own set of ideas or strategies or agendas, and instead the idea and the goal is whatever the results are. You want these results, you want to be on a high performing team. And if you and that other person can look at yourselves as teammates, and the opponent is whatever the wrong way forward is, it's amazing how much differently people treat each other when they start the conversation from that standpoint of viewing each other as teammates, looking towards a common goal, and just having different ideas of how to get there. When you start from a standpoint of looking at a teammate as an opponent who has a different goal than you have, it's really easy to get caught up in this and have it become, an unhealthy level of conflict, which turns into an avoidance or a fear of conflict because you just don't want to deal with it. And so, these exercises are really important. There's no such thing as a team that doesn't go through this. So if you as a leader, one of your responsibilities is to facilitate these kind of moments where they can happen in a healthy and a productive way, because when the time comes where it needs to happen anyway, where there's no avoidance of it, it needs to be able to be done in a way that kind of raises the cohesion of the team as opposed to degrades it.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.